Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Facts channel. I'm so glad you found your way here. Maybe you had a long day, or maybe you're the kind of person who likes falling asleep to underwater mysteries rather than counting sheep. Either way, tonight's journey is for you. Let your mind relax, your breathing slow, and your body grow light as a jellyfish drifting through dark water. Because tonight, we're exploring deep ocean life. Those quiet creatures that exist in perpetual twilight, miles beneath the waves. We'll drift from the twilight zone where sunlight fades to the abyssal plains where no light has ever reached, discovering how life thrives in the deepest, most peaceful places on Earth. Some of what you hear tonight may surprise you, or at least spark curiosity as you drift off. Before we begin, if this helps you unwind, consider liking and subscribing. One sleepy soul at a time. Now, let's begin. The deep ocean begins where sunlight can no longer penetrate, at depths of around 600 feet below the surface, where the water temperature drops and the pressure begins its steady increase with every foot of descent. This boundary marks the edge of the twilight zone, a realm where only the faintest blue light filters down from above, too dim for photosynthesis, but still visible to creatures adapted to detect these ghostly rays. Below this transitional layer lies the midnight zone, starting at around 3,000 feet, where darkness becomes absolute and complete, a blackness so total that the concept of day and night loses all meaning. The creatures here have never seen sunlight, their ancestors having descended into these depths millions of years ago, evolving in darkness for so many generations that light itself became irrelevant to their existence. The pressure at these depths increases by 1 atmosphere for every 33 feet, reaching crushing forces that would collapse most surface structures. Yet the organisms here feel no discomfort because the pressure exists, both outside and inside, their bodies equally, maintaining perfect balance. The temperature hovers just above freezing, typically between 35 and 39 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to slow metabolism, but not cold enough to freeze the salt-laden water. These conditions, stable and unchanging across vast distances, create an environment of remarkable constancy, where the slow passage of time means little, where seasons don't exist, where life unfolds in patient, unhurried rhythms that match the eternal stillness of the abyss. The marine snow that drifts constantly downward through the deep ocean consists of organic particles, dead plankton, fecal matter from surface-dwelling creatures, and fragments of larger organisms, all descending like a gentle, perpetual blizzard through the water column. These particles fall slowly, taking weeks or months to complete their journey from the sunlit surface to the deep ocean floor, thousands of feet below, their descent slowed by water resistance and by their small size. This marine snow provides the primary source of nutrition for deep-sea life, carrying energy captured by photosynthesis at the surface, down to the lightless depths where no plants can grow. The particles aggregate as they fall, sticking together to form larger, faster-sinking clusters called marine snowflakes, these fragile structures creating tiny habitats for bacteria and small organisms during their descent. The rate of snowfall determines the food supply available to deep-sea communities, with areas beneath productive surface waters receiving more organic matter than areas beneath nutrient-poor tropical seas, creating variation in deep-sea abundance despite the uniformity of physical conditions. Deep-sea creatures position themselves at different depths to intercept this falling food, some rising from the bottom to feed in the water column, others remaining on the seafloor to consume what settles there. The marine snow drifts down through darkness, like memories sinking through consciousness, each particle carrying a fragment of surface sunlight, transformed into organic matter, connecting the bright world above to the silent depths below. A continuous gentle rain that has fallen for millions of years will fall for millions more. The ocean's way of sharing resources between its separated realms. The anglerfish that inhabit the deep ocean possess one of nature's most remarkable adaptations, a bioluminescent lure extending from their heads like a fishing rod, dangling before their mouths to attract prey in the absolute darkness, where visual hunting would otherwise be impossible. The light comes from colonies of bioluminescent bacteria, living in a bulb at the end of the modified spine. These microorganisms producing chemical light in exchange for shelter and nutrients, a partnership millions of years old. The anglerfish can control the light's intensity somewhat by regulating blood flow to the lure, brightening or dimming the beacon as needed. Though the bacteria produce light continuously, their glow is constant as their metabolism allows. Only female anglerfish possess these elaborate lures, the males of many species being tiny in comparison. Parasitic creatures that bite onto females and fuse permanently, their bodies degenerating until they become little more than sperm-producing organs attached to their much larger mates. This extreme sexual dimorphism reflects the challenges of finding a mate in the vast, dark ocean, where encounters between individuals are rare. The male's sacrifice ensuring that when a female is ready to spawn, sperm will be available immediately. The female drifts through darkness with her living lure glowing softly, patient and still, waiting for curious prey to investigate the light. Her entire lifestyle built around this deception, this patient waiting in the dark. The lure waves gently in invisible currents, a small beacon in an endless night. The anglerfish embodying the deep ocean's unhurried tempo, content to wait hours or days between meals, time measured differently when you live in perpetual midnight. The giant squid, mysterious creature of legend and scientific fascination, grows to lengths exceeding 40 feet from the tip of its body to the end of its longest tentacles, making it one of Earth's largest invertebrates, despite spending its entire life in the deep ocean, where food is scarce. These enormous cephalopods possess eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, adapted to detect the faintest traces of bioluminescence in the deep-sea darkness, their massive pupils gathering every available photon. The giant squid's body consists primarily of ammonia-rich tissues that provide neutral buoyancy, allowing it to hang suspended in midwater without expending energy to swim, though this ammonia makes the flesh distasteful to most predators and humans alike. They hunt fish and smaller squid in the deep ocean's midwater zone, their 8 arms and 2 longer feeding tentacles lined with powerful suckers ringed with sharp hooks that grip prey firmly once captured. Despite their size and apparent ferocity, giant squid are not aggressive toward humans and probably couldn't be even if they wanted to, as they live at depths where humans cannot venture without specialized equipment, their world and ours separated by thousands of feet of water. The first footage of a living giant squid in its natural habitat wasn't captured until 2012. Despite centuries of finding dead specimens washed ashore or caught in fishing nets, a testament to how little we know about life in the deep sea. The giant squid drifts through the midnight zone like a living shadow, its massive eyes scanning darkness for the telltale shimmer of prey. Its movements graceful despite its size, embodying the ocean's mysterious depths, a creature more often imagined than observed. Its existence reminding us that wonder still dwells in the unexplored places of our planet. The vampire squid, despite its ominous name, is actually a gentle drifter that feeds on marine snow rather than hunting living prey. Its diet, consisting of the organic particles and detritus that rain down from the ocean's surface layers. This small cephalopod, reaching only about 1 foot in length, possesses a dark reddish body and large eyes that give it a somewhat eerie appearance, though its behavior is peaceful and passive compared to its aggressive-sounding name. When threatened, the vampire squid can turn itself inside out, pulling its webbed arms up over its body to expose rows of harmless soft spines, creating a defensive display that makes it appear larger and more formidable while actually being quite helpless. The vampire squid produces bioluminescent displays, creating clouds of glowing particles when disturbed. These light shows potentially confusing predators or attracting larger predators that might threaten whatever is threatening the squid. Its metabolic rate is remarkably low even by deep-sea standards, allowing it to survive on minimal food in the oxygen-poor waters of the oxygen minimum zone where it typically dwells, a layer of the ocean where dissolved oxygen concentrations drop to levels that few other creatures can tolerate. The vampire squid represents an ancient lineage, a living fossil whose basic body plan has changed little over hundreds of millions of years, its ancestors having found a successful strategy for deep-sea life and maintaining it across geological time. It drifts through the deep ocean with its arms held upward like a dark flower, collecting falling particles in strands of mucus, feeding on the ocean's leftovers. Patient and unhurried, embodying a lifestyle of minimal effort and maximum efficiency. The vampire squid, proving that even in Earth's most challenging environments, gentleness can be a successful survival strategy. The tripod fish that lives on the deep-sea floor possesses 3 elongated fins that it uses as stilts, propping itself up above the sediment with its body facing into the current, waiting for food particles and small prey to drift past in the water just above the bottom. These remarkable fish can grow their fin rays to lengths exceeding 3 feet, creating a stable tripod that elevates the fish's body about 2 or 3 feet above the seafloor, positioning it perfectly to intercept the horizontal flow of water carrying edible particles. The fish remains motionless for hours or even days, its energy expenditure minimal as it simply waits for food to come to it. This passive feeding strategy being ideally suited to the deep ocean, where active hunting would consume more energy than it would likely yield. The tripod fish's eyes are tiny and probably nearly useless in the absolute darkness, but it possesses other sensory systems, including highly sensitive lateral lines that detect water movements and chemical sensors that identify food items drifting nearby. When disturbed or when it decides to relocate, the fish can collapse its fin stilts and swim to a new location, though it typically remains in one spot until that position proves unproductive, the fish being a creature of patience rather than activity. Some species of tripod fish are hermaphroditic, possessing both male and female reproductive organs simultaneously, an adaptation that may help ensure reproduction in an environment where encountering another individual of your species is rare and unpredictable. The tripod fish stands on the abyssal plain like a sentinel, facing into the current, waiting with infinite patience, its existence a meditation on stillness, on the virtue of waiting, on surviving through doing nothing except being present. The fish, embodying a Zen-like approach to life that seems appropriate for a creature dwelling in Earth's most peaceful realm. The hydrothermal vents that occasionally punctuate the deep-sea floor, releasing superheated water laden with minerals from beneath Earth's crust, create oases of abundance in the otherwise sparsely populated abyss, supporting dense communities of specialized organisms found nowhere else on the planet. These vents, where seawater seeps into cracks in the seafloor, gets heated by magma chambers below, and spews back out at temperatures reaching 700 degrees Fahrenheit, provide both heat and chemical energy in an environment otherwise dependent entirely on food falling from distant, sunlit waters above. The vent communities include giant tube worms growing up to 8 feet long, their bodies lacking mouths or digestive systems, instead hosting symbiotic bacteria in specialized organs. These bacteria converting the vent's hydrogen sulfide into organic compounds that nourish their worm hosts. Clusters of white crabs and shrimp swarm around the vents, feeding on bacteria and on each other, creating a bizarre ecosystem based on chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis, proving that life doesn't require sunlight as long as chemical energy is available. The discovery of hydrothermal vents in 1977 revolutionized our understanding of where life can exist, suggesting that similar vent communities might exist on other worlds like Jupiter's moon Europa or Saturn's moon Enceladus, where liquid water and volcanic activity might coexist beneath ice crusts. The vents eventually die as geological processes shift and block the cracks that feed them, the communities then dispersing, their larvae drifting in deep currents to find new vents miles or hundreds of miles away, the deep sea becoming a network of temporary oases connected by darkness. The hot water billows from the vents like smoke from chimneys on the seafloor, the chemicals precipitating to form towers and structures that create architecture on the otherwise flat abyssal plain. These underwater geysers supporting life in the deepest darkness, proving that energy, not light, is life's fundamental requirement. The bioluminescence that characterizes so many deep-sea organisms serves multiple purposes, including attracting prey, finding mates, communicating with others of their species, and defending against predators through confusion or by attracting the predator's predator. The chemistry of bioluminescence involves luciferin molecules reacting with oxygen in the presence of luciferase enzymes, producing light with nearly perfect efficiency, almost no energy wasted as heat, making biological light production far more efficient than any artificial light source humans have created. The color of bioluminescence in deep-sea creatures is typically blue or blue-green, wavelengths that travel farthest through seawater and that match the dim blue light filtering down from the surface in the twilight zone, though some species produce red light, invisible to most deep-sea creatures, whose eyes detect only blue, giving those red light producers a private spotlight for hunting. Some fish possess light organs beneath their eyes like headlights, illuminating the water ahead to search for prey, while others have light organs arranged along their bellies to create counter-illumination, matching the faint, downwelling light from above to eliminate their silhouette and become invisible to predators looking upward. Certain species flash in specific patterns, bioluminescent Morse code that may help them recognize potential mates in the darkness, ensuring they don't waste energy approaching members of the wrong species when encounters are so rare that every opportunity must count. The deep ocean at night, if night has meaning in perpetual darkness, becomes a galaxy of moving lights, creatures flashing and glowing as they pursue their various purposes, creating constellations that form and dissolve and reform in patterns of biological imperative. The bioluminescence transforms the deep sea from pitch-black emptiness to a subtle light show. Organic lanterns drifting through the abyss, each flash a signal, each glow a message. The darkness not empty but filled with quiet conversation conducted in the language of light. The pressure that defines deep ocean life increases by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 33 feet of depth, meaning that at the average ocean depth of around 12,000 feet, the pressure reaches nearly 360 atmospheres, equivalent to having 3 tons of weight pressing on every square inch of surface area. Humans and most surface organisms would be crushed by such pressure, their gas-filled spaces like lungs and swim bladders being compressed until they collapse. Yet deep-sea creatures feel no discomfort because their bodies contain no air spaces and because their internal pressure matches the external pressure perfectly. The proteins and cellular structures of deep-sea organisms have evolved to function optimally under high pressure, actually requiring these pressures to maintain their proper 3-dimensional shapes and biochemical functions, making these creatures as unsuited to surface conditions as surface creatures are to the deep. When deep-sea fish are brought to the surface too quickly, the reverse of what happens to diving humans. They expand, and their tissues disrupt as dissolved gases come out of solution, though most deep-sea creatures die from temperature shock before pressure changes can affect them. Some deep-sea organisms use pressure-sensitive proteins as a way to sense depth, allowing them to maintain position in the water column or to migrate vertically with precision. These creatures possessing an awareness of their vertical position that surface dwellers can barely imagine. The pressure shapes everything about deep-sea life, from the types of molecules that remain stable to the speeds of chemical reactions, creating an environment so fundamentally different from the surface that deep-sea organisms represent independent solutions to the challenges of being alive. The water presses equally from all directions, a constant embrace that deep-sea creatures have adapted to so completely that they thrive under what we would consider crushing, impossible forces. The pressure becoming not a challenge but simply the nature of reality, accepted and incorporated. The ocean at depth, holding its inhabitants in a grip that feels to them like nothing, like normalcy, like home. The lack of light in the deep ocean eliminates photosynthesis, removing the primary energy pathway that supports most of Earth's ecosystems, making the deep sea entirely dependent on food falling from the sunlit surface waters, or, rarely, on chemical energy from hydrothermal vents. This dependence on imported energy makes the deep sea a fundamentally limited environment, where food is scarce and unpredictable, arriving in small parcels spread over vast areas, creating selective pressures that favor efficiency, patience, and adaptations that maximize the benefit from every meal. Deep-sea creatures typically have slow metabolisms compared to surface organisms, their biochemical processes proceeding at rates that match the cold temperatures and the limited energy available. These organisms living life in slow motion, their days stretching longer than ours, their years passing without the hurried pace that characterizes life in more productive environments. The scarcity of food in the deep ocean is reflected in the low density of organisms, with individual animals sometimes being separated by miles of empty water, their territories enormous compared to the crowded conditions on coral reefs or in forests where abundant energy supports dense populations. When a large food source does arrive, perhaps a dead whale sinking to the bottom, it creates a temporary abundance that attracts creatures from across the surrounding area. These whale falls, supporting entire communities for months or years as the carcass is gradually consumed. The deep ocean's food web is relatively simple compared to surface ecosystems. With fewer trophic levels and fewer species, the limited energy unable to support the complexity that characterizes more productive environments. Life proceeds slowly in the deep sea, organisms conserving energy, growing gradually, reproducing infrequently. The pace of existence, matching the rate at which energy trickles down from the distant surface. Every creature living within an energy budget that permits no waste, no excess, only careful allocation of scarce resources toward the essential functions of survival and reproduction. The deep-sea jellyfish that pulse slowly through the midnight zone come in remarkable variety, from tiny transparent bells barely an inch across to massive specimens with tentacles extending over 100 feet. These gelatinous predators, capturing prey with stinging cells or adhesive tentacles that trap anything that contacts them. Jellyfish bodies consist primarily of water, typically over 95% water, making them nearly neutrally buoyant and requiring minimal energy to maintain position, their bodies essentially being structured water that moves by contracting their bells to push water backward and propel themselves forward. The transparency common in deep-sea jellyfish makes them nearly invisible despite their size. Predators looking through them rather than at them, this invisibility being a form of camouflage that works, regardless of background or lighting conditions, perfect for life in open water, where there's nowhere to hide. Some deep-sea jellyfish produce bioluminescent displays when disturbed, their bells lighting up with waves of blue light that may startle predators or attract larger predators that might threaten whatever is bothering the jellyfish. This burglar alarm hypothesis, suggesting that being conspicuous when attacked might sometimes be safer than trying to hide. The life cycle of deep-sea jellyfish remains poorly understood because of the difficulty of observing them in their natural habitat, though presumably they follow the same basic pattern as shallow water species, alternating between a stationary polyp stage and a free-swimming medusa stage. The polyps attach to some substrate on the seafloor, or perhaps to floating debris. Jellyfish have existed for over 600 million years, predating most other animal groups, their basic body plan proving so successful in so many environments that evolution has seen little need to modify it. These simple creatures outlasting countless more complex organisms through their elegant simplicity. The jellyfish drifts through darkness, its transparent body invisible, its tentacles spread like a living net, capturing the microscopic prey that form its diet. This creature being more water than tissue, more space than substance, as close to nothing as a living thing can be, while still being something. The jellyfish, embodying minimalism, proving that complexity isn't necessary for success, that simplicity can persist across geological time. The gulper eel, with its enormous mouth that can open to swallow prey larger than its own body, represents one of the deep ocean's most unusual adaptations to life, in an environment where meals are rare and must be maximized when encountered. This eel's jaw hinges are located so far back that its mouth can expand to several times its normal size. The skull bones loosely connected to allow this extreme flexibility. The fish, essentially being a swimming mouth attached to a long, whip-like tail. The stomach of the gulper eel can stretch dramatically to accommodate large prey, allowing the fish to store food that it then digests slowly over days or weeks. This storage capacity being essential in an environment where the next meal might not appear for a very long time. Despite the impressive gape, gulper eels probably eat mostly small crustaceans and fish, their dramatic jaw mechanism being insurance against starvation rather than their primary feeding mode, though the ability to consume occasional large prey when opportunity presents provides a significant advantage. The eel's body tapers to a long, thin tail that ends in a glowing photophore, possibly used as a lure to attract prey toward the mouth, or perhaps serving some other function that researchers haven't yet determined. The gulper eel's eyes are tiny relative to its head size, suggesting that vision plays a minimal role in its life. The fish probably locating prey through other senses, including its lateral line system that detects water movements and chemical sensors that identify food items. The eel drifts through mid-water, its enormous jaws ready to engulf whatever small creatures venture too close. This fish being prepared for scarcity through its ability to exploit whatever food sources appear, the gulper eel's existence demonstrating that in the deep ocean, being able to eat almost anything is sometimes more important than being able to catch specific prey efficiently. The mouth gapes open in the darkness, a trap waiting to spring, the eel patient and unhurried, its entire body organized around the principle of making every meal count, of never letting food pass unconsumed. This creature's form following the function of surviving where food is precious and rare. The Dumbo octopus, named for the ear-like fins protruding from its head that resemble Disney's famous elephant, represents some of the deepest dwelling octopuses, living at depths exceeding 23,000 feet, deeper than any other octopus species, and in conditions that would seem impossible for soft-bodied creatures. These small octopuses, typically measuring less than 2 feet long, flap their ear-like fins to swim through the water in a graceful, unhurried manner, looking more like jellyfish than typical octopuses, their movement creating the impression of flying through water rather than crawling as their shallow water cousins do. The Dumbo octopus lacks the ink sac that most octopuses use for defense, this structure being useless in the deep ocean, where the darkness is already complete, and where creating a cloud of ink would serve no purpose. The absence of this organ, reflecting the different selective pressures operating in the abyss. These octopuses feed on worms, crustaceans, and other small invertebrates they encounter near the seafloor, hovering above the sediment and pouncing on prey with their webbed arms, capturing prey through ambush rather than through active pursuit. Conserving energy by moving only when necessary, the Dumbo octopus's body is gelatinous and soft compared to shallow water octopuses. Its tissues adapted to function under extreme pressure. These adaptations, including special proteins that maintain their structure despite the crushing forces and cold temperatures. Research on Dumbo octopuses is limited because they're so rarely encountered, living in one of Earth's least accessible environments. Most of what we know coming from specimens accidentally captured in deep-sea trawls or observed briefly by deep-diving submersibles. The Dumbo octopus flaps slowly through the abyss, its fins undulating gracefully, its tentacles trailing below. This creature moving with a dreamlike quality that seems perfectly suited to the timeless, pressureless darkness where it dwells. The octopus embodying the gentle pace of deep-sea life, never rushing, simply existing in harmony with an environment that rewards patience and punishes haste. The barrel-eye fish possesses one of the deep ocean's most unusual adaptations, a transparent head that allows its tubular eyes to look upward through its own forehead. These specialized eyes optimized for detecting the silhouettes of prey against the faint light filtering down from above. The fish's eyes are fixed in place, pointing straight up, but the entire head can rotate to track moving targets. The transparent dome of the skull, allowing light to reach the eyes from many angles while protecting the delicate optical structures from damage by jellyfish tentacles and other hazards. The barrel eye drifts at depths of around 2,000 feet, in the lower twilight zone, where the last traces of sunlight still penetrate. This depth range being optimal for its hunting strategy of spotting prey backlit by the dim surface glow. The fish's eyes contain large lenses and are packed with rod cells sensitive to blue-green light, maximizing their ability to detect the faintest illumination, these eyes being useless for seeing color or detail, but excellent for detecting movement and silhouettes. The green color filling the barrelized transparent head is actually its eyes, the large tubular structures being visible through the clear dome, looking like submarine periscopes aimed upward into the gloom. When the barrel eye spots prey above it, typically small fish or jellyfish, it tilts its body and rises toward the target, its eyes remaining locked on the prey throughout the approach, the transparent head, allowing the fish to maintain visual contact while adjusting its position. The barrel eye represents an extreme specialization for a particular lifestyle and hunting strategy. Its entire anatomy focused on the task of detecting prey against downwelling light. This fish being so perfectly adapted to its specific niche that it serves as an example of how evolution can craft highly specialized solutions to specific environmental challenges. The fish hovers in the twilight, looking up through its transparent head, watching for shadows crossing the faint light above, patient and still, its bizarre appearance making perfect sense when you understand its lifestyle. The barrel eye being beautiful in its strangeness, another example of the deep ocean's ability to generate forms that seem impossible, yet work perfectly in context. The deep-sea dragonfish, fierce-looking despite being only about 6 inches long, possesses a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth that it uses to capture other fish and crustaceans, its fangs so long that they don't fit inside its mouth when closed, the teeth curving outward in a permanent grimace. The dragonfish produces its own bioluminescent light from photophores along its body, including a distinctive barbel hanging from its chin like a beard. This appendage glowing with bioluminescence and possibly serving as a lure to attract prey, or as a light to illuminate prey during hunting. Some dragonfish species produce red bioluminescence, unusual in the deep ocean, where most light is blue. This red light being invisible to most deep-sea creatures, whose eyes detect only shorter wavelengths, giving the dragonfish the equivalent of night vision goggles that allow it to see prey without being seen itself. The dragonfish's eyes are relatively large for its body size, adapted for the dim conditions of the twilight zone where it typically hunts. These eyes capable of detecting both the blue bioluminescence that most deep-sea creatures produce and the red light that the dragonfish itself generates. Despite its fierce appearance and predatory lifestyle, the dragonfish is still a small creature, vulnerable to larger predators. Its dark coloring providing camouflage in the dim light, its body shape and coloration making it difficult to see from above or below. The dragonfish undergoes a dramatic transformation during its life cycle, the larval form looking nothing like the adult, having elongated stalks growing from its eyes and a body shape so different that early scientists classified larvae and adults as separate species, before realizing they were the same organism at different life stages. The dragonfish patrols the twilight zone, its barbel glowing softly, its fangs ready, searching for the small fish and crustaceans that form its diet. This creature looking fearsome, but actually being just another predator, trying to survive in a challenging environment, its appearance having been shaped by millions of years of evolution into a form that works in the specific conditions where it lives. The dragonfish showing us that what appears monstrous is often simply specialized, adapted, appropriate for its world, even if alien to ours. The metabolism of deep-sea creatures operates at rates significantly slower than surface-dwelling organisms, their biochemical processes proceeding at speeds that match the cold temperatures and limited food availability of their environment, allowing them to survive on minimal energy intake. The cold water, hovering just above freezing, slows molecular motion and reduces the rates of chemical reactions, meaning that everything from digestion to growth to reproduction happens more slowly than in warmer environments. Deep-sea organisms living their lives in a kind of slow motion, compared to the frenetic pace of tropical reef fish. This metabolic slowdown is not a disadvantage, but rather an essential adaptation, allowing deep-sea creatures to maintain themselves on the sparse and unpredictable food supply that characterizes the abyss. Their low energy requirements, meaning they can survive for weeks or months between meals. Some deep-sea fish have metabolic rates only 10 to 20% of what would be expected for similar-sized fish. Living in warmer surface waters, this dramatic reduction in energy expenditure being achieved through multiple mechanisms, including reduced muscle mass, simplified organ systems, and biochemical adaptations that allow proteins to function efficiently at low temperatures. The slow metabolism affects reproduction as well, with deep-sea fish typically growing slowly, maturing late, and producing relatively few offspring compared to surface species. This slow life history, making deep-sea populations vulnerable to overfishing because they cannot quickly replace individuals removed from the population. The metabolic strategies of deep-sea life represent a different way of being alive, where success comes not from being fast or aggressive, but from being efficient, patient, able to persist through long periods of want. The creatures of the deep demonstrating that life can thrive by slowing down, by doing less, by existing in harmony with an environment that provides little but demands even less. The giant isopod, a deep-sea crustacean related to the common pillbug found in gardens, grows to lengths exceeding 16 inches, making it one of the largest known isopods and an example of deep-sea gigantism, a phenomenon where species grow larger in the deep ocean than their shallow water relatives. These enormous pillbugs scavenge on the deep-sea floor, feeding on dead fish, whales, squid, and other organic matter that sinks to the bottom. Their powerful jaws capable of processing tough tissues, their digestive systems able to extract nutrients from decaying material that other scavengers might ignore. The giant isopod can survive for years without food, its metabolism so slow that it can maintain itself on stored energy for extraordinary periods, specimens in aquariums having survived over 5 years without eating anything. Though whether they do this in the wild or whether they simply refuse aquarium food remains uncertain. The isopod's segmented body is protected by overlapping plates that give it an armored appearance, these plates being flexible enough to allow the isopod to curl into a ball when threatened, presenting predators with a hard, round object, rather than a soft, vulnerable underside. The isopod walks across the seafloor on its 7 pairs of legs, moving slowly and deliberately, occasionally stopping to probe the sediment with its antennae, searching for food with senses adapted to the darkness, where vision provides little useful information. The compound eyes of the giant isopod are relatively large and appear to reflect light like mirrors. These eyes possibly being more sensitive than their size suggests, though vision likely plays a minor role compared to chemical and tactile senses in finding food and navigating the environment. The giant isopod embodies the deep ocean's tendency toward unexpected size. This enormous pillbug, looking like something from another world, yet being simply a familiar form scaled up. The creature showing us that the deep sea takes familiar patterns and transforms them through processes we don't fully understand. Gigantism being common enough in the abyss that it must confer advantages, though whether those advantages relate to food capture, reproduction, or some other factor, remains debated among researchers. The bioluminescent bacterial symbionts that many deep-sea fish host in specialized light organs represent one of the ocean's most successful partnerships, bacteria receiving shelter and nutrients while providing their hosts with the ability to produce light for hunting, communication, or camouflage. These bacteria belong primarily to the genus Photobacterium and related groups, microorganisms that have evolved the biochemical machinery to produce light efficiently, using chemical reactions that convert most of the input energy directly to visible light, rather than wasting it as heat. The fish cultivate these bacteria in pouches or chambers located in various parts of their bodies depending on species. Some fish having light organs beneath their eyes, others having them along their bellies, still others having them on lures or barbels that extend from their heads. The relationship between fish and bacteria is obligate in many cases, neither partner able to survive without the other, the bacteria having lost the ability to persist as free-living organisms, while the fish depends on bacterial light for functions essential to survival. The fish controls the light output through various mechanisms, including shutters that can cover the light organs, blood flow that can be increased or decreased to provide more or fewer nutrients to the bacteria, and pigments that can filter or focus the light. These control systems allowing the fish to modulate light production even though it cannot turn the bacteria on or off directly. The bacteria reproduce within the light organs, their populations being maintained at densities that produce optimal light output. The fish occasionally venting excess bacteria to prevent overgrowth, this population management ensuring that light production remains consistent and reliable. The partnership between fish and bacteria illustrates how symbiosis allows organisms to acquire capabilities they could not evolve independently. The fish gaining light production without developing the complex biochemical pathways required. The bacteria gaining a protected environment where they can thrive. This mutual benefit having been so successful that it has evolved independently multiple times in different fish lineages. The deep ocean's darkness, creating selective pressures that favor any solution to the challenge of producing light. The siphonophores that drift through the deep ocean, looking like single organisms but actually being colonies of specialized individuals called zooids, include some of the longest animals on Earth, with specimens recorded at lengths exceeding 120 feet, longer than blue whales, though far more delicate and less massive. Each zooid in the colony performs a specific function, some being responsible for swimming, others for feeding, still others for reproduction or defense. These individuals connected physically and sharing a common digestive system, creating a division of labor similar to tissues in a conventional organism but maintained across separate but coordinated individuals. The siphonophores drift through midwater, their long bodies undulating gently, their tentacles extending outward to form a vast net that captures any small organism that contacts it. The stinging cells on the tentacles paralyzing prey immediately, delivering it to feeding zooids that digest it and share the nutrients throughout the colony. The transparency of most siphonophore tissue makes them nearly invisible despite their size, predators looking through them rather than at them. This camouflage being particularly effective in the deep ocean, where most organisms depend on bioluminescence for light and where transparent objects become completely imperceptible against the black background. Some siphonophores produce spectacular bioluminescent displays when disturbed, waves of light flowing along their bodies, possibly startling predators or attracting larger predators that might threaten whatever is harassing the siphonophore, though the exact function of these displays remains uncertain. The reproductive zooids release eggs and sperm into the water, where fertilization occurs, the larvae developing into new colonies through a complex process where the founding individual buds off additional individuals with different specializations, the colony growing and organizing itself according to genetic programs that coordinate this bizarre form of development. The siphonophore represents an alternative solution to the challenge of being a large organism, achieving size, not through growing larger cells or more cells of one type, but through coordinating many specialized individuals into a functional whole. This colonial lifestyle having proven successful across hundreds of millions of years, the siphonophore demonstrating that the boundary between individual and colony is not as clear as we might assume, that life can be organized in ways that blur our categories, creating entities that are simultaneously one and many. The Huddle Zone, the deepest parts of the ocean found in trenches that plunge below 20,000 feet, represents the most extreme marine environment on Earth, where pressures exceed 1,000 atmospheres and where only the most specialized organisms can survive. These trenches, formed by the collision of tectonic plates, where one plate subducts beneath another, create narrow, elongated depressions in the seafloor, isolated from each other by thousands of miles of shallower ocean, each trench potentially harboring unique species found nowhere else. The water in the Hadal zone is extremely cold, near freezing, despite the incredible pressure, and contains very low oxygen concentrations, creating conditions that seem incompatible with life, yet support surprising diversity, including fish, crustaceans, and countless smaller organisms. The Hadal snailfish, discovered at depths exceeding 26,000 feet, holds the record for the deepest living fish ever observed. This translucent creature, somehow maintaining its structure and function under pressures that would crush most organisms, its body adapted through biochemical innovations that researchers are only beginning to understand. The Hadal zone receives organic matter falling from above, just like the rest of the deep ocean, but it also receives material from land through submarine avalanches that flow down the continental slopes into the trenches, these sediment flows carrying terrestrial organic matter to depths, where it provides unexpected food sources. The trenches act as sediment traps, accumulating organic-rich sediments over millions of years, creating thick deposits that provide habitat for burrowing organisms and that preserve records of Earth's history in their layered deposits. The Hadal zone remains one of Earth's least explored environments, more people having visited the surface of the Moon than having descended to the deepest parts of the ocean. The technical challenges and costs of reaching these depths, meaning that we know remarkably little about what lives in the trenches and how these ecosystems function, each expedition revealing new species and unexpected adaptations. The Hadal zone keeping most of its secrets still, a frontier of biology where major discoveries await those with the means and determination to explore Earth's final depths. The deep-sea cucumber, a relative of starfish and sea urchins despite looking nothing like them, crawls slowly across the abyssal plains feeding on organic particles in the sediment, its body processing vast quantities of mud to extract the small amounts of nutrition mixed within it. These elongated creatures, some reaching lengths of over 6 feet, move on rows of tube feet, tiny hydraulic legs that extend from their undersides, their slow progression across the seafloor, leaving trails in the sediment that can remain visible for months or years in the current free environment. The sea cucumber's front end possesses a ring of tentacles that it uses to shovel sediment into its mouth. These tentacles being modified tube feet, specialized for feeding rather than locomotion, the creature essentially eating its way across the sea floor, ingesting everything and digesting whatever organic matter is present. The intestine of a deep-sea cucumber can be longer than its body, coiled back and forth within the body cavity, maximizing the time that sediment spends being processed and increasing the efficiency of nutrient extraction from the extremely dilute food source. When threatened, some deep-sea cucumbers can expel their internal organs through either their mouth or anus, leaving behind these sticky structures to distract predators, while the cucumber escapes. This extreme defense mechanism, called evisceration, being survivable because the cucumber can regenerate the lost organs over subsequent weeks or months. The sea cucumber represents one of the deep ocean's most important organisms. Despite its humble appearance, these creatures processing enormous quantities of sediment, mixing surface and deeper layers, releasing nutrients through their waste products, creating a more habitable sediment environment for other organisms through their feeding activities. The sea cucumber embodies patience and persistence, crawling across the abyss at speeds measured in feet per hour, processing mud for the minuscule nutrition it contains, surviving and even thriving through sheer persistence. The creature demonstrating that success in the deep ocean requires neither speed nor aggression, only the ability to keep going, to maintain function, to persist across the vast timescales that characterize life in Earth's most stable environment. The vertical migration that many deep-sea organisms undertake daily, rising from the depths at night to feed in more productive surface waters and descending again before dawn, represents the largest migration on Earth in terms of biomass, though it occurs over vertical rather than horizontal distances. This diel vertical migration involves billions of tons of organisms, primarily small fish, squid, krill, and jellyfish, ascending hundreds or thousands of feet each evening as darkness falls at the surface, then descending to depth, before the sun rises again, the creatures seeking food in shallow waters, while minimizing time spent where light-dependent visual predators can find them. The migration transports nutrients from surface to depth, as organisms feed at night near the surface, and then descend to deeper waters, where they metabolize their food, releasing nutrients through respiration and excretion at depth. This biological pump being an important pathway by which carbon and other elements are moved from surface to deep ocean. The energy expenditure required for vertical migration is significant. The creatures swimming hundreds or thousands of feet twice daily, this investment being worthwhile because the food available in surface waters more than compensates for the energy costs and predation risks involved in the journey. Some deep-sea species remain at depth continuously, either because they cannot tolerate the warmer surface temperatures or because they have evolved strategies for surviving on the food that falls to them rather than rising to collect it themselves. These sedentary species trading the potential benefits of migration for the energy savings and safety of remaining in the deep. The vertical migration creates a twilight zone layer that becomes densely populated at night and then empties during day as its inhabitants descend. This daily rhythm being one of the ocean's most regular patterns, occurring every 24 hours regardless of season or weather, a biological clock driven by the sun's daily cycle, impacting creatures living far below where sunlight penetrates, the migration connecting surface and depth through the daily journeys of countless organisms. The chemosynthetic bacteria that form the base of food webs at hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, using chemical energy instead of sunlight to produce organic matter, represent an alternative pathway for life that operates independently of photosynthesis, proving that life doesn't require light as long as chemical energy is available. These bacteria oxidize reduced chemicals like hydrogen sulfide or methane, using the energy released by these reactions to fix carbon dioxide into organic compounds, essentially doing what plants do, but using chemistry instead of light as their energy source, creating a parallel but independent ecosystem basis. The discovery of these chemosynthetic ecosystems in the late 20th century challenged assumptions about life's requirements and about where life could exist, suggesting that similar ecosystems might exist on other worlds where sunlight is unavailable, but where geologic activity provides chemical energy, expanding the possibilities for life beyond what we previously imagined. The bacteria live as free-living organisms in the vent fluids, as filamentous mats covering surfaces near vents, and as symbionts within the tissues of larger organisms like tube worms and clams. These various lifestyles, allowing bacteria to exploit different niches within the vent environment. The productivity of vent ecosystems rivals that of tropical rainforests. Despite being based on a fundamentally different energy source, the abundance of chemical energy at vents, supporting dense populations of animals that would starve if dependent solely on food falling from the surface. The chemosynthetic bacteria represent ancient metabolic pathways, possibly among the earliest forms of metabolism that evolved on Earth. These bacteria being living representatives of how life might have begun, using chemical gradients as energy sources before photosynthesis evolved and transformed Earth's biosphere. The bacteria thrive in the hot, chemical-rich waters near vents, environments that would poison most organisms, their metabolism turning toxins into food, their existence demonstrating that life adapts to whatever energy sources are available, that chemistry can substitute for light, that life finds ways in places that seem impossible, the bacteria embodying resilience and versatility that extends life's reach into realms we might otherwise consider sterile. The transparent tissue that characterizes many deep-sea organisms, from jellyfish to squid to fish larvae, provides nearly perfect camouflage in open water, where there are no surfaces to hide behind, and where blending into a background isn't possible because there is no background. Transparency works by allowing light to pass through the organism rather than being absorbed or reflected, making the organism essentially invisible from most viewing angles, this camouflage being effective, regardless of lighting conditions or viewer position, unlike color-based camouflage that only works against specific backgrounds. Achieving transparency requires eliminating or minimizing anything that would absorb, scatter, or reflect light, including pigments, structural proteins, and even digestive contents. The transparent organism essentially becoming pure water held in biological shape, its substance reduced to the minimum necessary to maintain function. Some transparent organisms struggle with their eyes, which must absorb light to function, and therefore cannot be transparent, creating a compromise where the eyes remain visible even when the rest of the body is clear. These small dark spots, potentially being the only giveaway that something lives in what appears to be empty water. The digestive system poses similar challenges, as food typically isn't transparent and creates a visible mass within the otherwise clear body. Some transparent organisms having evolved modifications that reduce this visibility, including breaking food into smaller particles or having digestive systems that run along the body's sides rather than through its center. Transparency is more common in deep-sea organisms than in surface species, the deep sea's darkness making transparency more effective because there is less light to reveal even slightly non-transparent features, the camouflage, working better when ambient light levels are minimal. The transparent creatures drift through the abyss like living glass, their bodies present but imperceptible, their existence challenging the notion that being alive requires being visible. These organisms demonstrating that the ultimate camouflage involves not matching your surroundings, but rather becoming so undetectable that you effectively don't exist to observers, transparency representing the pinnacle of the art of not being seen. The longevity of deep-sea organisms often exceeds that of their shallow water relatives, with some species living for decades or even centuries, their extended lifespans reflecting the slow pace of life in cold, food-poor environments where growth and reproduction happen gradually. The orange ruffy, a deep-sea fish harvested commercially, can live for over 150 years, not reaching sexual maturity until they are around 30 years old. This slow life history, making the species extremely vulnerable to overfishing, because populations cannot recover quickly from exploitation. Some deep-sea corals live for thousands of years, these ancient organisms growing so slowly that they add less than a millimeter of new tissue per year, their skeletons preserving records of ocean chemistry across centuries, serving as underwater archives of environmental conditions before humans began systematically observing the oceans. The extreme longevity of deep-sea organisms relates to their slow metabolism, cold temperatures reducing the rate of biochemical damage and slowing the aging processes that limit lifespan in faster-living species. The deep-sea environment essentially slowing down the biological clocks that measure out lifespans. Long lifespans in the deep sea come with trade-offs, including slow growth, late maturation, and low reproductive rates, characteristics that make deep-sea species particularly vulnerable to human impacts that remove individuals faster than populations can replace them. The age of deep-sea organisms challenges human intuitions about marine life. These fish and invertebrates being contemporaries of surface species that live only a few years, individual deep-sea fish potentially being older than the nations whose boats harvest them, their slow accumulation of years invisible beneath the waves, the ancient creatures of the deep ocean, some alive since before industrialization, others having witnessed centuries of human history from their abyssal homes, embody time in ways that fast-living surface organisms do not. Their existence reminding us that different environments create different relationships with time, that longevity reflects not just biology but environment, that in the cold, dark, stable, deep ocean, life can proceed so slowly that individual organisms persist across human generations, their personal histories spanning eras that we divide into centuries. The sound production and reception in the deep ocean creates an acoustic environment quite different from shallow waters, with some deep-sea organisms producing sounds for communication, while others detect the sounds of prey or predators. The ocean's darkness making sound a more useful sense than vision for many purposes. The deep-sea fish that produce sounds typically do so through specialized swim bladders or other structures that can be vibrated to generate acoustic signals. These sounds serving to attract mates, maintain spacing between individuals, or perhaps for purposes we haven't yet identified. The acoustic ecology of the deep ocean remaining poorly understood compared to surface environments. The speed of sound in seawater increases with pressure, meaning that sound travels faster at depth than at the surface. This variation potentially affecting how deep-sea organisms use sound, though the details of how this influences their behavior remain largely unknown. The low-frequency sounds that whales and other large animals produce can travel enormous distances at depth. The deep sound channel carrying these calls for thousands of miles horizontally with minimal attenuation, creating a potential communication network that connects individuals across ocean basins. Though whether deep-sea organisms actually exploit this capacity remains uncertain. Human-generated noise from shipping, sonar, and other sources penetrates to great depths, potentially interfering with whatever acoustic communication deep-sea organisms engage in. Though assessing the impacts of noise pollution in the deep ocean proves challenging when we understand so little about baseline conditions and natural sound use. The deep ocean, often assumed to be silent because of its remoteness and the difficulty of observation, actually contains a complex soundscape of biological, geological, and now anthropogenic sounds. These acoustic signals carrying information through water that absorbs and scatters light but transmits sound efficiently. The darkness, making ears more valuable than eyes for many purposes. The sounds of the deep drift through the abyss, some traveling miles before fading, others being absorbed quickly by water and particles, the acoustic landscape being as three-dimensional and complex as the physical structure of the water column itself. Creatures using sound to navigate, communicate, and sense their environment in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. The deep ocean being not silent but rather speaking in frequencies and patterns we have not yet learned to fully hear or interpret. The parasitic lifestyle adopted by many deep-sea organisms, from copepods that attach to fish to anglerfish males that fuse permanently to females, represents an adaptation to environments where free-living existence is challenging and where dependence on a host provides reliable food and protection from the harsh conditions. These parasites range from external parasites that feed on their host's skin, blood, or tissues while remaining on the outside, to internal parasites that live within body cavities or even inside cells. The diversity of parasitic adaptations, reflecting the many ways that one organism can exploit another for resources and shelter. The males of many deep-sea anglerfish species, being much smaller than females and unable to feed effectively on their own, bite onto females when they encounter them and then permanently fuse, their circulatory systems joining, so that the male receives nutrients from the female's blood while providing sperm when needed. This extreme sexual parasitism represents a solution to the problem of finding mates in the vast, dark ocean, ensuring that when a female is ready to reproduce, sperm will be immediately available from her permanently attached male partner. Some deep-sea parasites are surprisingly large relative to their hosts. Copepods attached to fish, sometimes being a significant fraction of the fish's own size. These parasites extracting substantial resources from hosts that can ill afford the loss, given the limited food available in the deep ocean. The host fish tolerate these parasites, perhaps because the energy cost of resisting or removing them exceeds the cost of simply carrying them, or perhaps because effective immune responses or removal behaviors are difficult to maintain in energy-limited environments. The parasites persisting because hosts cannot eliminate them without investing more resources than they can spare. The parasites of the deep ocean exploit the other organisms living there, these relationships being neither cooperative nor antagonistic in any moral sense, but simply representing biological strategies for obtaining resources. The parasites using their hosts as mobile food sources and as transportation through an environment where independent existence is difficult, the deep sea's challenges, making dependence sometimes more viable than independence, the parasites demonstrating that survival strategies exist on a continuum from completely independent to completely dependent, with many successful organisms occupying positions between these extremes. The bacterial mats that cover portions of the deep sea floor, particularly near cold seeps where methane or other reduced chemicals seep from the sediment, create visible evidence of microbial metabolism. These white or orange mats, consisting of billions of bacteria, metabolizing chemicals and creating conditions that support larger organisms. The bacteria in these mats oxidize methane, hydrogen sulfide, or other chemicals, using the energy to fix carbon and create organic matter, their metabolism supporting food webs analogous to those at hydrothermal vents, proving that chemosynthesis isn't limited to hot vents but can occur wherever appropriate chemistry exists. Some of these bacterial mats are several inches thick, representing enormous concentrations of microbial biomass, their collective metabolism transforming the local chemistry of sediments and overlying water, creating conditions quite different from surrounding areas where bacteria are less abundant. The mats provide food for grazing organisms including snails, worms, and crustaceans that scrape bacteria from surfaces or that digest mat material along with the sediment it covers. These grazers, being analogous to herbivores in terrestrial ecosystems, despite feeding on bacteria rather than plants. The spatial extent of bacterial mats varies with the supply of chemicals from below. Mats expanding when seep activity increases and contracting when flows decline, creating a dynamic landscape where biological communities wax and wane in response to geological processes. The bacterial mats transform the deep sea floor from gray-brown sediment to white or orange carpets, creating visual diversity in an otherwise monotonous landscape, their presence being visible even in the complete darkness, because they reflect the lights of submersibles exploring the seafloor. The bacteria live packed together in these mats, their cells so numerous that they create structures visible to the naked eye despite each individual being microscopic, their collective metabolism releasing enough energy to support entire ecosystems. The mats demonstrating that microorganisms, though individually tiny and often overlooked, can have profound impacts when present in sufficient numbers, their small size being compensated by extraordinary abundance, the deep sea floor in places being transformed from barren sediment to biologically productive habitat, through the activities of bacteria too small to see individually, but collectively impossible to ignore. The cold seeps that occur where methane and other hydrocarbons leak from the seafloor, creating environments chemically similar to hydrothermal vents, but without the extreme temperatures, support communities of specialized organisms, including massive clams, tube worms, and bacterial mats that derive energy from the chemicals rather than from sunlight. These seeps occur along continental margins, where organic-rich sediments produce methane through decomposition, the gas seeping upward through cracks and faults until it reaches the seafloor, where it enters the ocean or is consumed by microorganisms before it can escape. The organisms living at cold seeps face challenges different from those at hot vents, the moderate temperatures being more compatible with conventional biology, but the lower energy density of cold seep chemicals, meaning that productivity, while higher than surrounding deep sea floor, doesn't reach the spectacular levels seen at the hottest vents. Some cold seep communities persist for decades or centuries, much longer than the typical lifespan of a hydrothermal vent. This stability, allowing the development of more mature communities with larger, older individuals and more complex ecological relationships. The clams at cold seeps, some reaching dinner plate size, live buried in sediment with only their siphons exposed. These clams hosting chemosynthetic bacteria in their gills, the bacteria providing nutrition, while the clam provides them with both the chemicals they need from the seep and the oxygen they need from the overlying water. The tube worms at cold seeps resemble those at hot vents but represent different species adapted to the specific conditions of seep environments. These worms also depending on bacterial symbionts for nutrition but harvesting different chemical substrates than their vent-dwelling relatives. The cold seeps demonstrate that chemosynthesis isn't limited to extreme temperature environments, that life can exploit chemical energy wherever it's available. The seeps being more numerous and widespread than hydrothermal vents, creating an extensive network of chemosynthetic oases across the deep-sea floor. These communities, representing a significant but often overlooked component of the deep ocean's biological diversity and productivity. The eye size variation among deep-sea fish reflects different adaptations to the light environment at various depths, with some species having enormous eyes to capture maximum light in the twilight zone, others having tiny or absent eyes in the deep midnight zone where vision provides no advantage. The giant eyes of some deep-sea fish, sometimes taking up more than half of the head volume, contain large lenses and are packed densely with light-sensitive cells, maximizing light capture in environments where every photon matters. These eyes being able to detect the faint bioluminescence that other organisms produce. The tubular eyes of some species, pointing upward like telescopes, sacrifice peripheral vision for increased sensitivity in one direction. These fish watching the water above them for silhouettes of prey or predators, backlit by the faint surface glow. Other deep-sea fish have reduced eyes, or lack them entirely, their resources being allocated to other senses rather than to vision that cannot function in absolute darkness. These blind fish navigating through smell, touch, and the detection of water movements. The transition from large eyes to small eyes to no eyes occurs gradually with increasing depth, following the decline in available light, creating a vertical gradient of eye size that mirrors the light gradient, each species' eyes being sized appropriately for the depth where it lives. Some deep-sea organisms retain eyes not for vision, but for detecting day-night cycles or seasonal changes in surface light that penetrates to their depth range, these eyes serving as light detectors rather than image-forming organs, sensing when to migrate vertically or when to reproduce. The eyes of deep-sea creatures, ranging from enormous to absent, tell stories about their lifestyles and habitats, the variation demonstrating how natural selection shapes sensory systems to match environmental conditions, allocating resources to the senses that provide useful information, while eliminating or reducing those that don't. The deep ocean, creating a natural laboratory where we can see how sensory biology adapts to different light regimes. From dim twilight to absolute darkness, the gelatinous bodies of many deep-sea organisms, from jellyfish to squid to certain fish, provide neutral buoyancy without requiring gas-filled swim bladders that would be compressed by the enormous pressure at depth. This body composition, allowing these creatures to float effortlessly without expending energy to maintain their position in the water column. The gelatinous tissue consists primarily of water, with some structural proteins and minimal metabolic tissues, creating bodies that are essentially organized seawater, requiring little energy to maintain while providing volume and form. The low muscle mass, typical of gelatinous organisms, reflects the energetic constraints of deep-sea life. These creatures unable to afford the metabolic costs of maintaining large amounts of metabolically active tissue, their bodies being mostly inert, structural material, rather than energy-consuming muscles and organs. Some gelatinous deep-sea fish have watery flesh that makes them unpalatable and inedible by conventional predators and by humans. This protection through unpalatability being as effective as armor or speed, while being much cheaper energetically, the fish essentially being protected by being unappealing. The transparency common among gelatinous organisms provides camouflage that doesn't depend on matching background colors. These creatures being invisible, not through mimicry, but through allowing light to pass through them, the ultimate form of not being seen. The gelatinous lifestyle represents an extreme adaptation to the deep ocean's limited food supply. These organisms reducing their metabolic needs to the absolute minimum by building bodies from inexpensive materials, maintaining minimal metabolic tissue, and floating rather than swimming actively, their existence demonstrating that success in the deep ocean requires shedding every unnecessary feature, becoming as close to nothing as a living thing can be, while still maintaining the functions necessary for survival and reproduction. The gelatinous creatures drift through the abyss like living water, their forms temporary, their substance borrowed from the ocean and destined to return to it. These organisms blurring the boundary between living and non-living, being barely more than organized ocean, their minimalism being their greatest adaptation, their simplicity, their key to success. The absence of plants in the deep ocean, due to the lack of light for photosynthesis, means that the deep sea lacks the primary production that forms the base of most ecosystems, making every deep-sea organism dependent directly or indirectly on food falling from the sunlit surface waters above. This dependence creates a fundamentally different ecosystem structure compared to surface environments, where primary producers are present. The deep sea being entirely heterotrophic, all its organisms consuming rather than producing, taking rather than making, dependent on the surplus production from far above. The food chain in the deep ocean is short, typically involving only 2 or 3 links from the falling organic matter to the largest predators, this simplicity reflecting the limited energy available and the efficiency required to survive on such meager resources. The absence of primary production means that deep-sea communities cannot support the same biomass or diversity as surface communities receiving equivalent energy input, the deep sea being inherently less productive than shallower waters, its organisms always living at the edge of starvation, always energy limited. The evolutionary history of deep-sea organisms involves descent from shallow water ancestors. These lineages having colonized the deep ocean gradually, adapting to darkness and pressure and food scarcity over millions of years, their success in the deep sea representing triumphs of adaptation over challenges that initially must have seemed insurmountable. The lack of plants transforms the deep ocean into an environment unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. A realm where sunlight's influence is felt only indirectly through the food that falls from above, where photosynthesis is absent, but where life persists through consuming what the sunlit world produces. The deep sea being sustained by surface productivity yet separate from it, connected through the falling marine snow, but divided by thousands of feet of water, the two realms linked but distinct, one producing and the other consuming. The deep ocean being Earth's largest ecosystem, built entirely on imports, on charity from above, on the surplus that the surface cannot consume, and that gravity carries downward to support the patient creatures waiting in darkness below. The reproduction strategies of deep-sea organisms reflect the challenges of finding mates in vast, dark environments, where population densities are low and where individuals may be separated by miles of empty water, creating selective pressures that favor any adaptation, increasing the probability of successful reproduction. Many deep-sea fish release enormous numbers of small eggs that drift with currents, spreading offspring across wide areas to increase the chances that some will survive and encounter food resources or suitable habitat. This broadcasts spawning, requiring minimal parental investment, but producing many offspring, of which only tiny fractions survive to adulthood. Some species show elaborate sexual dimorphism, with males being much smaller than females, and sometimes being parasitic, as in the anglerfish, where males fuse permanently to females, ensuring that sperm is available when needed, without requiring the male to maintain independent existence. Other deep-sea organisms produce fewer, larger eggs that are better provisioned with yolk, giving offspring a better start in life at the cost of producing fewer offspring. This trade-off between offspring number and offspring quality being resolved differently by different species depending on their ecology. The larvae of many deep-sea fish develop in shallower water, where food is more abundant, gradually descending to deeper water as they grow. This ontogenetic vertical migration, allowing the young to grow in more productive environments before assuming the low-energy lifestyle of adults in the deep. Some deep-sea organisms are hermaphroditic, possessing both male and female reproductive organs, either simultaneously or sequentially. This adaptation, ensuring that any encounter with another individual of the same species provides a potential mating opportunity regardless of sex. The scarcity of mates in the deep ocean makes reproduction one of life's greatest challenges. There, more difficult even than finding food or avoiding predators, the vastness and emptiness, creating a situation where simply finding another member of your species to reproduce with represents a significant accomplishment. The deep-sea organisms that succeed being those with strategies that maximize the probability of this rare event occurring, their reproductive adaptations being as important to their success as their feeding adaptations or their pressure tolerance. Reproduction being the ultimate challenge that all the other adaptations exist to support, the purpose being not merely survival but the creation of the next generation to continue the lineage into an uncertain future. The whale fall communities that develop when dead whales sink to the deep sea floor, bringing years' worth of food to organisms adapted to chronic starvation, represent temporary oases of abundance in the food-poor abyss, supporting specialized communities through several stages of succession, as different organisms exploit different resources. The initial mobile scavenger stage begins within hours of the carcass landing on the seafloor, with hagfish, sleeper sharks, and other scavengers being attracted by chemicals released by the decaying whale. These organisms consuming the soft tissues rapidly, sometimes removing hundreds of pounds of flesh per day. The enrichment opportunist stage follows, lasting months to years, during which dense populations of worms, crustaceans, and other organisms colonize the area around the skeleton, feeding on organic-rich sediments and on the remaining tissues. This stage, supporting much higher biomass than the surrounding seafloor, despite the whale's soft tissues being gone. The sulfophilic stage begins when anaerobic bacteria inside the bones begin breaking down the lipids that whales store in their bones, producing hydrogen sulfide that seeps from the skeleton, supporting chemosynthetic bacteria and the communities that depend on them, including specialized mussels, clams, and worms found nowhere else. This final stage can persist for decades or even centuries for large whales, the bones providing sufficient lipids to support chemosynthetic communities for extraordinary periods, creating stable habitats in an otherwise unstable and unpredictable environment. The whale fall communities include species found at cold seeps and hydrothermal vents, suggesting that these isolated oases serve as stepping stones, allowing vent-adapted organisms to disperse across the deep-sea floor. Whale falls being temporary, but predictable enough to support populations of organisms requiring chemosynthetic energy sources. The whale sinks through darkness, its journey ending where its body will support an entire ecosystem. This final gift, transforming death into life, the whale's organic matter, supporting thousands of organisms that will convert its substance into their own. The carbon that the whale captured at the surface during its life being released in the deep, the nutrients that built its tissues being recycled. Death being not an ending but a transformation. The whale's body providing abundance where scarcity is the norm. Its presence supporting life for decades after its own life ended. The whale fall, demonstrating that in the deep ocean, death is generous, supporting communities that could not otherwise exist, creating temporary gardens of life in the abyssal desert. The pressure adaptations of deep-sea proteins involve subtle changes in amino acid sequences that allow these molecules to maintain their proper three-dimensional shapes and functions under conditions that would denature, disrupt proteins from surface organisms. These molecular modifications being essential for life at depth. The proteins in deep-sea organisms contain more flexible regions and fewer rigid structures compared to surface proteins. This flexibility, allowing them to resist the pressure-induced changes in shape that would occur with more rigid molecules, the proteins essentially being built to bend rather than break under stress. Some deep-sea proteins contain small organic molecules called osmolytes that stabilize protein structure under pressure. These compounds working by affecting the water molecules surrounding proteins, making it energetically unfavorable for proteins to unfold even under the enormous forces present at depth. The membranes of deep-sea cells contain higher proportions of unsaturated fatty acids compared to surface cells. These kinked fatty acids preventing the membranes from becoming too rigid under pressure, maintaining the fluid properties necessary for membrane function across a wide range of pressures. The study of pressure adaptations in deep-sea organisms has revealed general principles about how proteins can be stabilized against various stresses. These insights being applied to industrial processes and to drug development, deep-sea biology, providing solutions to engineering problems through the examples of molecules shaped by millions of years of evolution. The molecular adaptations to pressure are invisible to observation but fundamental to survival, occurring at scales far below what we can see but determining whether organisms can function in the deep ocean or whether they fail. These chemical solutions to physical problems allowing life to colonize environments that would otherwise be sterile. The proteins adapting their structures in subtle ways that have enormous consequences, the deep-sea organisms proving that life can modify its molecular machinery to function under almost any conditions given sufficient evolutionary time to find solutions. The bioluminescent displays produced by deep-sea organisms for defense, called burglar alarms, involve sudden bright flashes intended to startle predators or to attract larger predators that might threaten whatever is attacking the light-producing organism. This counterintuitive defense strategy, turning the tables by making the prey more rather than less visible. The flashing organism takes a calculated risk, betting that the attention its light attracts will include predators of its attacker, essentially calling for help by making a commotion. This strategy, working because in the deep ocean, most organisms have predators, and a bright light, in the darkness, draws attention from everything nearby. Some deep-sea squid eject bioluminescent ink when threatened, creating glowing clouds that confuse predators and provide the squid with time to escape. This modification of the ink cloud defense, used by shallow water squid, being adapted to the deep ocean's light environment where regular ink would be invisible. Certain deep-sea fish produce bioluminescent vomit when swallowed by predators, their light organs producing intense displays inside the predator's stomach or mouth, potentially causing the predator to regurgitate the glowing fish while it's still alive and able to escape. This last-ditch defense strategy being surprising but apparently effective. The jellyfish that produce spectacular bioluminescent displays when contacted, their bells lighting up with waves of blue light, create visual spectacles that seem excessive for simple defense, but that may be highly effective in an environment where light is so rare that any display attracts immediate attention. The defensive use of bioluminescence demonstrates how organisms can turn environmental features to their advantage. The deep ocean's darkness making light an especially powerful signal, the creatures using light not just for finding food or mates, but for avoiding becoming food themselves, their bioluminescence being multi-purpose, serving various needs, the same biochemical system producing light for different purposes, depending on context. The organisms demonstrating the efficiency that characterizes successful deep-sea life, every adaptation serving multiple functions, nothing being single-purpose when resources are limited and every investment must pay multiple dividends. The coloration of deep-sea fish, typically being black, dark brown, or red, reflects adaptations to the light environment at various depths. These colors providing camouflage by either absorbing light that might otherwise reflect from the fish's body, or by being invisible under the wavelengths present at depth. Black fish absorb all wavelengths of light, preventing reflection that might betray their presence, this coloration being particularly common in the twilight zone, where enough light exists that silhouettes and reflections can reveal objects to visual predators. Red coloration, common in some deep-sea shrimp and fish, appears black at depth because red wavelengths don't penetrate to these depths, the red fish being effectively invisible to predators whose bioluminescence and eyes both operate in the blue-green part of the spectrum, this color being camouflaged through absence of illumination rather than through matching background. Silver coloration, common in some deep-sea fish, provides camouflage through reflecting light in ways that make the fish blend with the surrounding water. The reflective scales, creating counter-illumination that eliminates the fish's silhouette when viewed from certain angles. The variation in deep-sea coloration reflects different solutions to the problem of avoiding detection, with different strategies being optimal at different depths and for different lifestyles. Visual predators, creating selective pressure for effective camouflage, while the lack of light at depth makes color less important than texture and reflectivity. The study of deep-sea coloration has revealed that what appears black to human eyes in surface light may reflect or emit light at wavelengths invisible to us, but visible to deep-sea creatures. Our visual system being inadequate for assessing the colors that matter in the deep ocean. The fish being colored for eyes quite different from ours, their appearance in surface light being irrelevant to their actual function. The colors serving purposes in light environments we can barely imagine, let alone see. The deep ocean, operating on visual principles different from those that govern appearance in the sunlit world. The feeding appendages of deep-sea organisms, from the elongated jaws of gulper eels to the sensitive barbels of many fish to the filtering structures of some crustaceans, represent specialized adaptations for capturing and processing the limited food available in the deep ocean. Each appendage type being suited to particular feeding strategies. The hinged jaws that can swing open to enormous gapes allow fish to consume prey larger than themselves. Important in an environment where meals are rare and must be maximized, the fish essentially being mouths with bodies attached. Their entire anatomy organized around the principle of never passing up potential food regardless of size. The long, thin barbels extending from many deep-sea fish, covered with taste receptors and touch-sensitive cells, allow these fish to detect prey in complete darkness by sensing chemical and mechanical cues, the barbels effectively being tongues extending into the water to taste the environment continuously. The delicate filtering structures of some deep-sea crustaceans trap small particles from the water column, allowing these organisms to feed on the tiny fragments that constitute marine snow, their filters being fine enough to capture particles that individual handling would be inefficient. The animals processing large volumes of water to extract the small amounts of nutrition present. Some deep-sea fish possess teeth that curve inward, preventing prey from escaping once captured. These teeth being delicate because they're rarely used violently, but effective because their shape makes escape nearly impossible once something enters the mouth. The tactile feeding appendages common in seafloor-dwelling organisms allow these creatures to probe sediment and to manipulate objects in the complete darkness, where vision provides no information about texture or shape, touch becoming the primary sense for interaction with the physical world. The feeding structures of deep-sea organisms demonstrate how form follows function, how evolutionary pressure shapes anatomy to solve specific problems, the deep ocean requiring specialized tools for capturing scarce food. Each organism's feeding appendages being precisely adapted to its particular dietary niche, the diversity of structures, reflecting the diversity of feeding strategies that different species employ in their attempts to gather sufficient nutrition from an environment that seems to offer too little to support life, yet somehow supports extraordinary diversity. The darkness of the deep ocean, absolute and complete below the twilight zone, creates an environment fundamentally different from any on land, where even the darkest caves eventually connect to the surface, and where day-night cycles remain relevant even to organisms that never see sunlight. The deep-sea darkness is unchanging. No day or night, no seasons of longer or shorter days, only perpetual midnight that has existed since the ocean formed, and that will persist until the ocean ceases to exist. This temporal constancy creating an environment where circadian rhythms serve no purpose and where time itself becomes less meaningful. The organisms living in this darkness have evolved sensory systems adapted to detect bioluminescence rather than sunlight. Their eyes, when present, being sensitive to the blue-green light that most organisms produce, creating a visual world where the only light sources are biological, where seeing means detecting other organisms rather than perceiving landscapes or objects. The absence of light eliminates most visual communication, colors becoming irrelevant because they cannot be seen, patterns and displays losing their meaning, the creatures instead communicating through bioluminescent signals that can be controlled and modulated, turning on and off rather than simply being present as colors would be. The darkness affects behavior in subtle ways, eliminating the day-night activity patterns that structure life in the sunlit world, allowing organisms to be active at any time without regard to light conditions, creating continuous opportunities for feeding and reproduction that are not synchronized to daily cycles, but that instead follow internal rhythms or respond to encounters with food or mates. The deep ocean's darkness, far from being an absence or a lack, becomes a defining presence that shapes every aspect of life there. The darkness not being merely the absence of light, but being a fundamental condition that has driven evolution in directions impossible in illuminated environments. The creatures of the deep being adapted to darkness as thoroughly as surface creatures are adapted to light. Their existence demonstrating that what seems to us like absence can be to them the essential nature of their world. Darkness being not a void to be filled, but a medium to be adapted to. The deep ocean, proving that life doesn't require light, only energy, and that darkness can support communities as diverse and successful as those thriving in the brightest sunlight. The carbon cycle in the deep ocean involves the transport of carbon from surface waters, where photosynthesis fixes atmospheric carbon dioxide into organic matter, through the various pathways that move this organic carbon to depth, to the eventual decomposition or burial that determines whether the carbon returns to the atmosphere or is stored in sediments for geological time periods. The biological pump, driven by the sinking of organic particles and the vertical migration of organisms, moves carbon from the surface to the deep ocean, removing it from interaction with the atmosphere for the time it remains at depth. This pump being a crucial component of the global carbon cycle that influences atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations and climate. The deep ocean serves as Earth's largest reservoir of dissolved inorganic carbon, containing more carbon than the atmosphere and all terrestrial ecosystems combined, this carbon being gradually mixed with surface waters through ocean circulation over timescales of hundreds to thousands of years, the deep ocean being a long-term storage system that buffers atmospheric carbon dioxide changes. The organisms living in the deep ocean participate in the carbon cycle by consuming organic matter, releasing carbon dioxide through respiration, and occasionally being buried in sediments, where their bodies become part of the geological carbon pool, removed from active cycling until tectonic processes eventually return them to the surface, millions of years later. The role of deep-sea organisms in the carbon cycle is often overlooked because of their remoteness and the difficulty of studying them. Yet their collective metabolism processes significant amounts of carbon, their activities influencing the efficiency of the biological pump and the fraction of surface-produced organic matter that is remineralized at depth versus being buried. The deep ocean's carbon cycle operates at scales both temporal and spatial that dwarf human experience. The process is unfolding over centuries and across entire ocean basins. The carbon atoms, cycling through living and non-living reservoirs, the deep sea being both temporary storage and ultimate disposal for carbon that began its journey in the atmosphere or at the surface, the deep-sea organisms being participants in a cycle that transcends their individual existences. Their feeding and respiration, connecting surface to depth, atmosphere to ocean, the present to the geological past and future. Their small bodies being cogs in the enormous machinery of the global carbon cycle. The deep ocean currents that flow along the seafloor, driven by differences in water density created by temperature and salinity variations, create the slow-moving streams that distribute heat, nutrients, and dissolved gases through the abyss, these currents being essential for maintaining the chemical conditions that deep-sea life requires. The thermohaline circulation, also called the global conveyor belt, connects the world's oceans through a system of deep and surface currents that takes roughly 1,000 years to complete a full cycle, water sinking in polar regions where it becomes cold and dense, flowing along the bottom through the Atlantic, Antarctic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, gradually mixing upward to return eventually to the surface. These deep currents move slowly, typically at speeds measured in inches per minute rather than miles per hour. The water advancing patiently through the abyss, carrying dissolved oxygen from polar regions, where it was absorbed from the atmosphere, down to depths where no other oxygen source exists. This oxygenated water being essential for supporting aerobic life throughout the deep ocean. The nutrients that accumulate in deep water through the decomposition of sinking organic matter are eventually returned to the surface through upwelling in certain regions, completing the nutrient cycle and fertilizing surface waters, maintaining the ocean's productivity despite the continuous loss of nutrients to depth. The deep ocean currents create a dynamic abyss, the water being continuously replaced rather than being stagnant, the environment changing over timescales of decades to centuries, rather than remaining perfectly constant. These slow changes potentially being sensed by long-lived organisms that experience the gradual shifts in temperature, salinity, and oxygen content as the water they inhabit is slowly replaced by water from different sources. The currents connect distant parts of the ocean, larvae and other small organisms potentially being transported hundreds or thousands of miles from their origin, creating opportunities for dispersal and gene flow across vast distances. The currents being highways that connect populations that would otherwise be isolated. The slow movement of water, creating the possibility for movement of life. The deep ocean being not static, but slowly flowing, not isolated but connected. The currents being the arteries through which life and chemistry flow, maintaining the conditions that allow the deep ocean to be inhabited rather than sterile. The mysteries that remain about deep ocean life, despite centuries of study, include fundamental questions about species distributions, population sizes, reproduction timing, larval development, predator-prey relationships, and countless other aspects of ecology that are well understood for surface organisms, but that remain enigmatic for creatures living in Earth's largest and least accessible habitat. The total number of species inhabiting the deep ocean remains unknown, with estimates ranging from hundreds of thousands to millions. The uncertainty reflecting both the difficulty of sampling the deep ocean comprehensively and the challenge of identifying species when specimens are often damaged during collection and when many groups lack taxonomic expertise. The feeding relationships in deep-sea communities are poorly understood because observing predation in the deep ocean requires technology that can observe organisms at depth without disturbing them, such observations being rare and expensive, leaving us to infer food webs from gut contents and stable isotope analyses, rather than from direct observation. The reproductive biology of most deep-sea organisms remains mysterious, including basic information about when and where they spawn, how long their larvae develop, and what cues trigger reproduction. These knowledge gaps, making it difficult to predict how populations will respond to environmental changes or fishing pressure. The distributions of many deep-sea species are known only from a handful of collection locations, leaving vast areas of the deep ocean unexplored, and raising questions about whether species ranges are continuous or fragmented, whether populations are isolated or connected by larval dispersal, whether what we consider single species are actually multiple cryptic species with limited ranges. The deep ocean represents Earth's last biological frontier, a realm where major discoveries await anyone with the resources and determination to explore, where new species are found on nearly every expedition, where basic ecological principles remain to be established, the deep sea keeping its secrets not through active concealment, but simply through being remote, dark, and difficult to access. The organisms living there being as mysterious as they are, because we have barely begun to study them. The deep ocean being a reminder that our planet still holds vast unknowns, that understanding Earth's life remains incomplete, that wonder and discovery await in the depths, if we choose to explore them. And now the deep ocean fades behind your thoughts. We've drifted through 100 quiet truths about life in Earth's deepest waters. From the gentle fall of marine snow to the patient creatures waiting in complete darkness, from the glowing lanterns of anglerfish to the ancient communities at hydrothermal vents, from transparent jellyfish drifting like living glass to the crushing pressures that shape everything about existence in the abyss, you are connected to this world. The oxygen you breathe was produced partly by the surface ocean above these depths. The carbon in your body has cycled through these waters over geological time. The same water that fills the abyss fills clouds and rain, and the cells of your body. You are made of ocean, as surely as the creatures we've encountered tonight. Your chemistry and theirs sharing the same elements, the same molecules, the same fundamental patterns of being alive. Tonight, as you rest, the deep ocean continues its timeless existence, miles below the surface. Creatures drifting through darkness, marine snow falling eternally downward, bacteria converting chemicals to energy, the cold water moving in currents too slow to perceive, life proceeding at a pace that makes our hurried days seem frantic by comparison. The deep ocean exists in profound peace, its darkness sheltering rather than threatening, its pressure being simply the nature of reality for those born into it, its cold being the temperature of home for creatures who know no warmth. And you are safe, warm, resting in a world full of wonder, where the deepest places hold the most patient forms of life, where darkness teems with adapted creatures, where pressure and cold and scarcity have created not a wasteland, but a realm of quiet beauty that asks only to be appreciated for what it is, rather than judged by the standards of the sunlit surface. If you're still awake, go ahead and watch the next chapter. Sleep well and dream softly. Good night.